welcome to episode 9 of Interview with Scientist series at the Addictive Brain. Today we have Dr. Parag Mahanti with us, and let me introduce you to Dr. Parag Mahanti. Dr. Parag is a scientist with experience in life science, strategy, and consulting. He received his PhD in chemistry and chemical biology in 2013 from Cornell University, and his research was focused about nuclear hormone receptors, steroid signaling, and metabolomics. He is currently working at Novartis, focusing on strategic planning and operations around pricing and access, and is currently the director of US Market Access Business Planning. Welcome, Parag. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chinmay.
So, could you tell us more about your career as a scientist? How did you start and what?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I come from Calcutta, which is on the eastern part of India, and if for those who don't know about India, I have left India for a while now, but India has always been very focused towards science education. And
Yes.
in general, education as a whole, like all of us who grew up in India, we grew up with the idea that if you didn't follow higher education, your life was pretty much gone, right? Like that was the general tendency. And Calcutta was one of those centers where, Bengalis think that scientists are kind of like to be respected. It doesn't matter if you don't have a job, but if you're a scientist, it's great, right? And so I grew up in a family like that where studying science was a good thing. And so I studied chemistry just because everybody around my vicinity in my family had studied chemistry. Like my father had studied chemistry, my elder brother had started studying chemistry, my uncle was a chemist. And so I started studying chemistry in India. And then, of course, I thought, oh, so bachelor's and then master's. And then, of course, PhD is the best next step.
Yes.
And so I came in the US to do my PhD.
Yeah.
And I worked at a great lab at Cornell, focusing on NMR spectroscopy.
Okay.
But we were chemists by training, but we were trying to answer biological problems,
Yes.
specifically about small molecule signaling. So if you imagine, biochemical pathways exist in living organisms all the time. How
Yes.
can you understand the biochemical pathways, and can you solve it like a puzzle? Can you take snapshots of a biochemical pathway
Yes.
using chemical tools to elaborate a total pathway, right? So that was my work,
Yeah.
specifically on steroid receptors,
Okay.
which are basically receptors that bind to a steroid
Yes.
and then switch on or off
Okay.
further downstream signaling. And
Okay.
so my job, or one of my projects mainly, was understanding what these steroids were and
Yes.
how they were being produced.
Okay.
Um, so that was, in a nutshell, my project. I also worked using NMR spectroscopy. I worked on other pathways,
Yes.
one of which was very near and dear to my heart, and it was a big project, which was I met somebody in a conference, and she was working on a super cool experiment where we were working with worms,
Yes.
and just before the worm dies, the entire body of the worm becomes blue,
Okay.
and we called it the blue wave of death,
Okay.
but we didn't know what it was. And so our lab, and I started that collaboration, and our lab then tried to understand what it was, and we finally found out that
Yes.
it was a tryptophan metabolite. So tryptophan is an amino acid, but
Yes.
when tryptophan degrades, it produces these entire chain of molecules, which
Mhm.
are all very important in different pathways.
Yeah.
But one of those molecules is a fluorophore that
Okay.
actually becomes blue under UV light, which is what she was seeing.
Okay.
And so then that became it got picked up by a lot of journals, got picked up by Huffington Post, and they were like, oh, this is a blue wave of death. It was really cool.
Yeah.
I would say the coolest part of it was that molecule actually sits within a pathway
Okay.
called kynurenine pathway,
Okay.
which actually affects both neural degradation or neural pathways. So it's important in Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
On the other hand, that same molecule actually binds to a oncogenic receptor.
Okay.
So it also has like cancer implications.
Yes.
So uh, I mean, now I'm trying to be like I'm trying to reduce my nerdiness about this, but that was in a nutshell my kind of scientist background, so to say.
Okay. That sounds really amazing. So, when and why did you decide to leave academics?
Yeah, this is it's a question that I faced back then, and a question I face a lot.
Yep.
Um, I I'll try to frame it in a way that I don't know if I think the notion that we, and you will understand as well, as you were kind of, I know a little bit about your background and your story as well. Um, it's not so much as leaving academia as it is pursuing a career that one thinks is aligned to one's goals, right? So whether or not that career is within academia or outside
Yep.
is just a matter of choice, right? Like is working on in the lab and answering fundamental questions about biology and chemistry something that you want to continue do for the next few years, or do you want to go towards an applicative field where
Yep.
you want to take your analytical ability and apply it elsewhere,
Okay.
was kind of the question, right? So for me, around third or fourth year of my PhD,
Yeah.
I realized that I loved the science, I loved the research, but I didn't really quite envision myself as kind of a career, researcher. Like I loved the science and I saw what it did, but
Yes.
then my mind started asking, like, how can I use this training that I have
Yes.
in development of drugs, in development of outside of research, what else can be done, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I started kind of talking to people.
Hmm.
And therefore, there were other things as well. I kind of could see that a lot of the work that I was doing was very fundamental to understanding signal molecules. But how do I then take it to the next step, right? And
Yes.
that's where kind of I started talking to people, and people said, hey, everything that you're learning within chemical biology or biology, life sciences can be utilized in multiple other things,
Yes.
both within life sciences industry, within finance, within pharma. And so I started essentially understanding what else one can do. And what I realized was talking to people was one of the things that I liked. And people said at that time that I could do well.
Okay.
And I was lucky in the manner that some people around me, not my immediate friends, but within my network, so to say, kind of identified that consulting would be a route that I would actually be successful in.
Okay.
And so I joined the consulting club, learned more about it, and realized, okay, this is something super interesting. I'm not losing my science,
Yes.
uh, my identity as a scientist, but I'm being able to use all the analytical tools and techniques that I learned in
Yes.
a different manner, right? So that was pretty much, if I have to summarize, understanding that I wanted to go use the analytical ability elsewhere, as
Yes.
well as the realization that I didn't want to be on the bench. I
Oh,
could still do research, but
yes.
I didn't have to be on the bench all the time to do that. And so that's what led me to kind of explore other areas, of
Okay.
which consulting became the main one. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, that definitely answers my question. So, uh, what do you do in your current role as a strategic planner, and what did you do as a consultant? And
Sure.
what are some of the transferable skills that you brought from academics to industry that help you be successful in the role?
Absolutely. So very quickly, I'll kind of draw out the path, right? So I did consulting for about 2.5 years within the biopharma industry,
Okay.
which basically meant I was using kind of the analytical skills to understand data that were sometimes, but wasn't always scientific data. But
Yes.
I was trying to use kind of the basic transferable skill set that every PhD has, which is data collection, data interpretation, and presenting that data in a meaningful manner, right? This
Yes.
is what we do throughout our PhD, and
Yes.
that's what we were doing essentially in consulting. We were gathering data from outside research. We
Yes.
were then trying to understand what does that data mean,
Okay.
and then connect the meaning of the data to the questions that were posed,
Oh,
right? And this is a, I would consider that as a transferable skill. And
yes.
so I did that for 2.5 years. And then I moved to equity research,
Okay.
which essentially is looking at companies and realizing which biotech companies uh, are worth investing in based on their clinical trials and based on their scientific pedigree and so on and so forth. So if you think about today, for example, there are so many companies doing COVID-19 trials or doing oncology clinical trials or any other trials. But the generalist folks that are around us may not be completely understanding what does the clinical trial mean? What does a 94% success rate mean,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So in order to translate that scientific information
Yes.
into something that is tangible for people to understand that drug A is maybe slightly better than drug B, right?
Yes.
And this is not about how whether clinically they are having the same effect,
Mhm.
but this is about the fact that okay, if drug A and B were both commercialized,
Yes.
how much revenue are they going to generate? Is the question investors are asking,
Okay.
right? And so that understanding that okay, a drug A is in phase 2 and
Yes.
has shown XYZ data,
Yep.
whereas drug B is in phase 2 and has shown, KLM data. How do these two data compare so
Yeah.
that in a 5 year or 10 year time span, which of these two drugs are going to be more successful? And
Okay.
so you do that by doing a lot of literature research. So that's another transferable skill. So in equity research, you essentially are a scientist. You're
Yes.
just reading papers and understanding what does this vector, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this vector versus the other one in gene therapy context, right? So here again is a transferable skill. In equity research, you also write a lot.
Okay.
So writing scientific information in a manner that people who do not have specialized understanding of science is
Yes.
a key skill to have. How do you translate that information into something that people read and realize, oh, this is great, right? So one of the things that we would do all the time is take a whole bunch of, let's say, New England Journal papers. And for many of your listeners who may not be aware, New England is one of the premier journals to publish clinical data.
Of course.
So if you take a whole bunch of New England journals on the same clinical trial or same kind of pathway
Yes.
and try to compare the data across multiple trials,
Yeah.
first of all, can you compare them?
Hmm.
And if you compare them, how do you compare? Because one trial might use young population between ages 12 to 20, and
Yes.
another might use ages 35 to 50. So automatically they are not comparable. But can you look at, for an oncology trial, can you look at overall survival numbers
Yes.
or PFS numbers or overall response rates? These are all jargons that are used in oncology,
Yeah.
but can you compare these outcomes to define what drug is slightly better or significantly better than another?
Okay.
And so that's what I did for another 2.5 years. And then I moved to Novartis at my current position where I'm working on I did a few things,
Okay.
but currently I'm working on strategy and business planning within market access. Market access is the part where you are trying to you're facilitating access to drugs for
Yes.
patients.
Yes.
What are the strategies that you can use to improve patient access to these drugs that they need,
Yes.
right? And so then this becomes kind of again the overlap of scientific or analytical understanding
Yeah.
and overlap of a commercial understanding of the business. And so once again, the transferable skills here are communication,
Yeah.
understanding how to manage time, deliverables, people. These are all transferable skills that we have learned in the lab, right? Like if you are a
Of course.
PhD or a postdoc, you've trained an undergrad student, you've trained a postdoc student. How
Yes.
have you learned how to manage people, right? How have you learned to manage deadlines? So
Yes.
these are all I often kind of feel sad when I say this because these are all skills that we are taught or we train every day during a PhD, but
Yes.
nobody tells us during that time that, hey, this is a key skill that you should remember, right?
Yes.
Later on, you realize, oh, I did this just in another context. And I think recruiters has to understand that if somebody has done this for 5 years or 6 years,
Yes.
they're not just a student. They are people who have done this for a while.
Yeah.
And I think what you are doing, what many of us are doing at other levels of making sure people understand that PhDs have these skills is super important for them to understand. So in a nutshell, I'm not going to go into too details about like exactly my job, but those are the kind of transferable skills that one can use in consulting, in equity research, and within a commercial function within pharma.
Great points, actually. So I think our listeners will definitely gain some insights from this and may be able to use these transferable skills when they're looking for jobs.
I hope so.
And so you have been working in the industry for like 7 to 8 years or more.
So
So
about 6, 7 years, yes.
7 years. So what are the pros and cons of working in an industry compared to academics?
Oh, that's a loaded question. um, so let me start with pros first, right?
Yep.
So first of all, I think academia, just because of the sheer nature of the amount of research, as well as the fact that academia, in a lot of way, is still thought to be kind of a voluntary, um, almost like a charitable kind of work, right? That you're doing this for gaining knowledge and you're doing this for society, for
Yes.
whatever reason it is. But academia um, does not have a lot of scope to increase your compensation,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
whereas the moment you go to industry, you're at a different range when it comes to the 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 range of compensation and the range of I would say output of the kind of valuation that you're getting as a skill set is very different in the industry versus academia, and this is something that everybody knows.
Yep.
The other pros of industry, I would say, is that one of the things that I have always felt within academia is
Mhm.
that you're constantly surrounded by other people who are thinking almost similarly,
Yes.
right? You're thinking, I would go into the deepest of the deep knowledge information and find out as much as I can. And once I have achieved that, I will take that data and gather some output out of it. Real life isn't like that. You won't have the time to gather all the information that you can. Oftentimes, the amount of time that you have to get data and to analyze it is not the same as it is in academia, as it is in industry, right? So, how can you come up with the best possible alternative
Yep.
that makes you come to a conclusion
Yep.
without, of course, um, without compromising the sensitivity of
Yep.
that information,
Yes.
yet coming up with a conclusion that is actionable,
Okay.
is something that industry teaches you, right? So it's the same analytical process, except now you're working with a team that is cross-functional. You're
Mhm.
working with a group of people who have very varied experiences.
Yes.
So how do you manage to kind of compile and combine those experiences to come to a point where, hey, I don't need to know everything about everything,
Yep.
right? I can know about this, and that person X knows a lot about topic Y. How can I combine those two so that together this comes out to be like a combined effort? So I
Yes.
think the level of collaboration, the level of taking a small amount of data and yet being able to come up with a actionable conclusion,
Mhm.
being able to take opinions and being able to take experiences from multiple different parts of life and
Yes.
being able to converge them to gather that actionable conclusion. These are all pros in industry that I think, unless you're in a super collaborative lab or you're in a field that is super cross-functional or applicative, you don't always get a chance like this in academia.
Yes.
Now, if I start thinking about pros of academia, on the other hand,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, if you're at a good lab that is giving you the freedom to work on things that you want to work on,
Yeah.
you're not being bound always. You're often bound. I mean, first of all, I would preface this or caveat this.
Yeah.
I'm not a professor, right?
Yes.
Many of my friends are. I haven't done a postdoc, so
Okay.
I don't have these direct experiences of that.
Yeah.
But from secondary knowledge, from what I see from my friends, my wife was a postdoc for a few years. You are often bound by your own timelines. You're
Yeah.
not necessarily within a week answerable to, hey, this data needs to be done by Thursday. That does not happen in this situation, right? It's
Yes.
more, hey, this is the experiment we're running, and let's figure out how that answers the question we are getting. As opposed to in industry, it's we need this data by Thursday. If we don't get 90% of the data, let's figure out how much can we get, and let's manage expectations.
Mhm.
So the freedom of operation in academia is higher. The
Yes.
freedom of going into depth into a certain topic is higher. Now it depends on the person who is listening and what they want to do, right? Do you
Yeah.
want to be within that freedom? And do you want to then, if you're more bent towards, no, I really want to understand all of this knowledge base that is there and nobody has found out, I really want to explore it, then
Yeah.
academia is for you. As
Okay.
opposed to if you want to take a step back and say, well, other people are exploring it, can I take that information and use it for application in somewhere else?
Yeah.
Then maybe industry is the path, right? Um, I think in terms of day to day, academia involves a lot more kind of, it's a very flexible, I would say flexible in the sense that, my lab routine was I would come back whenever I reached in the lab in the morning, but I would come back for dinner or whatever at 6:30, and
Yes.
then kind of stay at home for a while, then go back at night, and then finish more experiments, and then, whatever I had to do.
Yes.
Um, when you're working in a team with an industry, and it depends on industry to industry, right? Consulting is different, finance is different, pharma is different. But here, you are you don't want to like continue working throughout the day. You absolutely can. Nobody's going to stop you.
Yeah.
There's no like rigidity that no, you have to stop at 6 and then it's done.
Yes.
But the work is so continuous,
Yeah.
and there is so much involved with communication with other teams and other people, and you're dependent on other people. It's not just you who's doing the experiment every day,
Yeah.
right? Every day you're working and talking to a bunch of other people whose responses and replies to your questions will determine your next step.
Mhm.
So that kind of is a very nuanced, and I don't even know whether it's a pro or a con, but it's just different, right?
Yes.
In academia, you can work by yourself, finish the experiment when you want, or
Yes.
continue the experiment later at night.
Yeah.
Here, after a point, if you want to continue, it's great. But if you email somebody at 6 p.m.,
Yes.
it's not necessary that they are going to reply to you at 6 p.m.
Yes.
That's not how industry. So it's a time bound thing where people are like, all right, let's pick it up tomorrow morning,
Mhm.
which I think after a certain point of time in age and experience is a good thing,
Yes.
where you're not working 24/7, right?
Yes.
You have a time bound and you start again, and so I think there is, at the end of the day, I think there is pro and con for both sides if I have to take that their sides. But I don't think it's kind of black or white. I think there are some of us, like some of my very close friends, are
Yeah.
very academically bent. I
Mhm.
mean, today, many of my colleagues will say that I'm still academically bent, right? I don't think so. So
Okay.
if I so when I talk to my scientist friends, they're like, oh, you've gone to the industry, you're not thinking in this way. But
Yeah.
when I talk to my industry colleagues, they're like, oh, you are thinking of this from an academic perspective, right? So it's a I can now see the dichotomy of the two sides.
Uh-huh.
And I would say it's about a person, it's a personal choice, which one you like.
Yes.
Um, Once again, it's a long answer I gave, but I don't know if that answers your
Oh, that
question.
answers my question. So, I'm a part of your LinkedIn support group. So, could you tell us more about the group and why did you start it? What led you to start that group?
Absolutely. So, so again, let's go back to the path or the story that I was saying. So I graduated from Cornell at 2013, and before that, before I graduated, I started thinking, what else? What am I doing now?
Yes.
And when I started talking to people, I realized my immediate friend circle, everybody around me who was doing chemistry or who was doing biology or biochemistry, didn't know anything about what jobs were outside of a postdoc or an R&D position. And that to me was a surprise. Like, why? I'm not the first one who's getting a PhD. There are like thousands and millions of PhDs before. I'm
Yes.
at a good institution,
Yes.
and yet there isn't enough available resources that everybody knows what you can do.
Mhm.
And this was a struggle at that time. And you 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 know this more than any of or many other people. But when you look back, things seem linear. But at the time, things are not linear. Everybody goes through their own kind of struggle. And I went through the same thing where I was trying to look for information. And I found many. I found a website called phdcareerguide.com that I keep talking about at different places.
Yeah.
And this was a website that compiled a whole bunch of um, jobs that you can do after PhD.
Okay.
I was like, why isn't this website being told to everybody around us? So
Yes.
many of the people who were in my lab after me, graduated after me,
Yes.
when I found this resource, I said, hey, check this out. Figure out if any of these things involve, your interest.
Mhm.
And so when I graduated into consulting, then friends started talking and friends of friends started talking to me.
Yeah.
And then I realized there are so many other people who are trying to look for the same information that I have already gone through. And I'm not the first one. Other people that I have taken help from
Yeah.
have also gone through. And yet there are very few resources where people pool in that combined knowledge to
Yes.
help others, right? So I started a blog back then, and I had done a little bit of market. I wouldn't say market, but like I had asked a whole bunch of friends, hey,
Mhm.
what do you think are the barriers for people to understand this information?
Yes.
So I was trying to do it in my own way when I met a couple of people who were starting, who had created an alumni group
Mhm.
from an Indian institution,
Yes.
right? And so we combined kind of our efforts and we grew that Facebook group at that time.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much like, oh, you can kind of create a Facebook group that tells other people.
Yes.
Now, the issue about that was that it was Facebook, right? And for me, back then itself, I could see that LinkedIn was far more powerful,
Yes.
but I was doing a consulting job and a finance job. So I'd started the LinkedIn group back then,
Mhm.
but it was never kind of like I wasn't able to properly kind of nurture it.
Yes.
But the goal always was that, hey, can PhDs also be active on LinkedIn
Yeah.
and at least be able to talk to people? Because
Yes.
that I think is the most important thing for people to understand is the networking aspect. And so that's why when last year, end of last year, when I kind of was in a better work-life balance, I
Yes.
started nurturing the group more.
Okay.
And the crux of the group is to get people to talk to other people. The conversation that you are doing through Addictive Brain,
Yes.
and can we get all those resources together in one place?
Yes.
And then Anupam, my close friend, he's focused on the academia aspect. He's pursuing an academic career. you are there. There are many other such thought leaders, I would say, who have now thankfully joined the group, and the
Yes.
group has now exploded, which I'm very, very happy and proud about.
Yes.
And that was the genesis, right? It was basically, can we get a bunch of people who know about this,
Yes.
talk about this, and kind of start having a discussion? And so I think there's a long way to go, but I think we have reached about 5,500 people, which I think is a good job.
Yes.
But
Definitely.
but let's see what comes next.
Yeah, definitely. The group, I have been a part of it since last 4 months, and I see really useful tips, definitely, and helpful comments and posts as well.
Thank you.
So good job on doing that. And LinkedIn, yes, as you said, is a good platform, but many of us scientists or PhD students are not part of LinkedIn.
Right,
That has to change. So
right, right.
yeah,
And the question often I get is, what will I get at LinkedIn, right? That's the question we get.
yes,
And this is one of those answers, right? All right, just create a profile and join this group,
yeah,
and then you'll figure out who to talk to. Because there
yes,
are two questions: what will I do after my PhD,
yeah,
and who should I talk to?
yes,
So the question of what is still being answered, and we have some plans about, like, how can we combine resources, but who should I talk to is what this group is all about. And it's not just about visa questions. It's not just about um, within a certain group of people. It's about scientists and non-scientists. It's about academic careers
yeah,
and non-academic careers. So that's why I think the group has become interesting for many people, because it combines uh, people from a bunch of different aspects.
definitely. Because I have seen fellow science communicators in the group, which has been really helpful because I couldn't find them. Of course, not all of them I know, but now I
Right?
know a bunch of people through your group. So thank you.
Of
So
course.
before ending the session, I would just like to ask you: do you have any suggestion for those who want to transition out of academics?
Absolutely. I think I say this all the time. I'd say it again. The first step is introspection. You
Yes.
have to understand what is it that you like and don't like.
Yes.
Now, I am an international student myself. I know that often what I want to do will be bounded. It's a bounded condition. It'll
Yes.
be bounded by whether I have the immigration correct things or not.
Yes.
But the first question still is, what is it that you want to do?
Yeah.
And for this, you will need information of what is out there.
Yeah.
So ask yourself, do you know what you want to do? If not, talk to people and find out what is out there, and then come back to yourself and say, what is it that I want to do?
Yes.
Once you know that, then again, talk to a whole bunch of people,
Yeah.
right? I think those are the two most important things to kind of figure out. And then the third thing is, if you have invested time in your research, if you have invested time in everything else, invest time in researching about career. A lot of people make the mistake that they keep investing time on their research, and they don't invest time on research for their career.
Yes.
So understanding what I want, understanding who should I talk to and how should you talk to them, and
Yes.
then finally realizing, all right, these are the few career options that I have. Which one should I go into? These
Yes.
are probably the ones that I would say. Of course, I have much more kind of, we can have another hour-long session
Yeah.
about like how you should think about resumes and how you should think about.
Yes.
But very quickly, if you are a scientist, see if you have a tech transfer position internship open
Hmm.
nearby, apply for that, or volunteer for that. If you are not doing it already, start talking to people outside of your domains. If you're taking classes within your university, talk to people who you would never otherwise talk to.
Yes.
And then when you're making your resume, if you're somebody who's trying to get out of academia,
Yeah.
remember that research is great, but people aren't always giving the amount of importance you are giving to your research.
Yes.
So your resume cannot be pages and pages or lines and lines about your own research. It has to be very succinct. It has to grab people's attention of why this is important. but
Yes.
then say what you learned from it, right? So I think this is a separate conversation, but those are the few things that I would say for those who are listening.
Okay. Well, we thank you very much for your time.
Of course,
It was really a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for all the suggestions and tips. And we'll definitely drop the LinkedIn group in our comments.
absolutely. It
Thank
was a pleasure to talk to you, Chinmay. And this is Addictive Brain is awesome. So
Yeah.
for everybody who's coming to the page right now, I strongly recommend you following Chinmay and following Addictive Brain. This is
Thank you
awesome.
very much.